Today I'm going to be taking a look at this Zyke store, aka AJ Seeker SKS 7300 8GPY4XGS. This particular model, which is rack mountable, has 8 2.5 gig ports and 4 10 gig SFP plus connectors. I have kind of a weird setup right now, so this is going to replace 3 switches that I'm not really making use of. Should lower the power quite a bit because it's a lot more modern, it uses a lot more modern hardware, and it's not using 10 gig base T, meaning regular Ethernet jacks. I can use direct attach copper cables and lower the power even more. This assortment of nonsense is what I was using for my existing network. I purchased this Edimax Pro XGS 5008 a long time ago, and it was very expensive. It has only 8 ports. They're 10 gig. They are very dirty. I can see a lot of dust in there. This 8-port switch I think was like $400 because back then 10 gig was really expensive. Now it's come down in price a lot, but I've still been using this thing. It works fine at 10 gig, and I had a 24-port 1 gig switch that I used for a long time, but that was like super overkill. I didn't use even half the ports. I retired that thing and swapped it out for this 8-port 2.5 gig switch from TP-Link, and this thing was great. And they've really come down in prices. One of the many models that I found on Serve the Home. Both of these, I think, were on Serve the Home reviews, so I'll try to remember to put in links to those because they go into much more detail than I do for this kind of stuff. I'm not going to sit here and hook up all the ports and do that kind of detailed analysis. All I need to know is if it works. This one gave me 8 2.5 gig ports, except I realized a slight problem. Because this Edimax is so old, these ports only support 1 gig and 10 gig. They don't support 2.5 gig and 5 gig. Not that I have any 5 gig stuff. No one really uses that. Ended up with this weird issue where the connection between the switches was running at 1 gig and I was losing out on speed whenever devices needed to communicate across the 2 switches. So I ended up picking up this QNAP model, which has a couple 10 gig and 4 2.5 gig ports. This allowed me to bridge these together at 2.5 gig. But all of this is kind of pointless because I kind of rearranged stuff, kind of just don't have as many hardline devices in this room anymore. I don't have like IPMI ports. I decided to downsize all this and hopefully lower the power consumption. Specifically, I really needed the 4 10 gig ports, or 25, but 25 gig switches are super expensive right now. And I wanted 2.5 gig because I've moved most of my stuff except for some like legacy devices at access points, that kind of stuff. So I really just needed a few 2.5 gig for 10 gig ports because I need one to my VM server, one to my Plex server, one to my capture PC, and then this will be spare for now, but I'm probably just going to put a 10 gig transceiver in it for 10 gig base T. So when I'm doing testing on equipment for filming, if I need to hook up 10 gig to it, I might as well, I have the port. These are the 25 gig NICs that I use. I bought 3 of these, and this one's been spare all this time because I had it in another system at which I retired. And these are actually a server board that uses a funky connector down there. And then some people in China just made these PCBs to convert it into regular PCI Express, because that's all it is. It's a PCI Express connector in a weird form factor. And they just designed a card out of a completely different card, which I think is actually quite cool. They put this horrible little fan on it that doesn't do anything. These cards get relatively hot, but what I like to do is I just disconnect the fan, and these holes line up for a 40mm fan, and I just screw in a Noctua there. It sticks out a little bit, so if you have a card right next to it, it won't work, but if you've got a slot free next to it, which usually is the case, you can just run this with a little 40mm fan on it instead of these horrible things that just either seize up or just make a grinding sound. These Connect X4s from Mellanox are pretty power efficient. They come in 2-port versions like this, and I think there's also a 1-port version, but I don't have any of those. They do take up an 8X slot. As for connecting between the 2 devices, I'm just using something like this, which is an SFP Plus direct attach copper cable. And this is literally just pairs of copper cables that just run between the two ports. There's no fancy buffering, which is why 10G base T uses up so much power. It's because it's got to use all this extra hardware to not only do error correction, but it has to buffer it and all sorts of stuff due to the weird signaling schemes it uses. So if you're running a short connection, these are great. They use a lot less power, make less heat, and cost less, and they're just great. As you can see, they just slot in, and you can just pull on the little tab and take them out, and they work great. You can put in fiber modules and all sorts of stuff, but I don't need fiber. Hilariously, this thing has a console port, which uses a Cisco style serial cable that they do include. It does have a basic web interface. It looks like it's from 2003, but it works just fine. Again, I'm using pretty basic, kind of straightforward stuff. I'm not doing any complicated VLAN stuff or filtering or anything like that. So pretty much out of the box, it works fine. I just logged into it and changed it to DHCP, and that's pretty much all I did. I just realized they put mounts so you can actually reverse mount this. I'm guessing that's not what this is for. It might be so you can wall mount it in some way, because this is moved a little further back, these screw mounts, compared to here. So I'm guessing this is so you can just like screw it into the wall or something. I'm not sure. Does anyone know who to call to get permission? Because I don't. I'm just going to do it anyway. With this opened up, I don't see any immediate red flags, other than the fact that the fan is a weird custom job, which I don't like. I'd rather it be like a 40mm on the side that I could replace. That being said, I don't really hear much noise from it while it's running, and it's only on the actual SoC. I know this specifically uses some Realtek chipsets. One for the main controller, and I think that's also providing the 10 gig ports, and then there's another one that's providing the 2.5 gig ports. But seriously, this looks great inside. I mean, big heat sinks on everything, so it doesn't need to run stuff very fast to keep it cool. The fan is not PWM controlled, but it may be voltage controlled. I'm not sure. It doesn't make much noise. When I hear it, it's just like kind of like air moving. And honestly, it's on a server rack. Everything else makes more noise than it. The power supply is made by Powered, and I am shocked. It is all Japanese capacitors. They're Nippon Chemicon and some Rubicon ones. The other part of what I'm changing is I'm also putting in a Keystone panel for the first time. I've never actually had Keystone stuff before, somehow, and I'm just using some Cat6a pass-throughs. And these are specifically coupler style ones because I don't want to have to do custom cables for everything. And these are just a simple 3D print that are two clasping parts that allow you to run the direct attach copper cables just through the hole. I also 3D printed some blanks temporarily until I get everything sorted out. And lastly, this is what the direct attach copper cable adapters look like. So you can just pull them out, run the wire through it. I picked up a bunch of randomly colored, random sized, extra thin Cat6a cables. And yeah, I admit it's purely cosmetic, but you know, they're kind of cool. So I figured I'd switch over. I was actually really impressed with the build quality inside of this thing. I didn't know what to expect. I hadn't opened it before filming, and usually these kind of generic, almost network gear devices are often just nightmares inside with bad caps and everything, but this was pretty good. I'm going to shut down all my server equipment so I can safely move my server rack without destroying 15 hard drives, and do a little bit of rewiring and hopefully get that done pretty quick since it means no internet. Hey, hey.